Welcome. We appreciate you joining with us to watch this message. We pray it will bless you, that we'll all learn, grow, and become more like Jesus. Let's join in watching the message at this time.
Okay, so audience participation. How many of us have had someone make us a promise and they broke that promise? Okay, almost everybody. How about that? Now here's a question, and this backfired on me in first service. How many of us have broken promises? Now when I asked that question in first service, nobody raised their hand. Then I realized I hadn't raised my hand either. So once I raised my hand, the other hands go. So some of you really joyfully admit breaking promises. We've all done it. We've all broken promises. And sadly, promises don't mean as much as what they used to. Look at the marriage vow. Till death do we part. And yet the marriages are going up in smoke because in many times it's not because of something major, it's just because one of the spouses wants out. And it doesn't matter if the other one keeps the promise, the other one wants out. And so words have become cheap. I recently saw a social media post, and this person was explaining that in the past, marriage was a promise until one of us died. Now they explained it's until love dies. They explained also, and they were serious about this, that a marriage relationship is a lifetime with one person. Now they explain the relationship is one person at a time. And we can see how marriage vows don't mean a whole lot anymore. A lot of promises don't mean a whole lot. It's become the way of our culture. People are attempting to redefine things. It's like saying, well, I'm going to be faithful to you as long as I'm happy. But when I'm not happy anymore, I'm moving on to somebody else. That's not a promise. It's cheapening what our words mean. There was a time, when I was a boy at least, where young boys would make blood promises. Now, that was the day when all, at least country boys, carried a penknife or pocket knife with them. And they would make a promise to each other, and they'd say, well, let's do a blood oath. So they'd whip out their pocket knife, no matter how sharp or rusty it was, and they'd make a small slice on their thumb, each of them, and then they would get the blood coming a little bit, and they'd rub it together, and that was a blood promise. And they tried as best as little boys to keep that promise. I can remember I would make a promise to my brother when we were growing up, and he'd say, sure, you'll break the promise. No, I won't. Cross my heart and hope to die if I break the promise. We don't hear any of this anymore. I don't know what kids do anymore, but then again, I'm not certain how well I kept the promises either. Hey, this is primary week in the state of Ohio. How many of us believe, I'm not raising my hand, that the politicians are going to keep their promises? See, we don't trust them because they take it cheap. We get them into office and they break their promises. We don't trust people and their promises, and that has led us many times to not believe that God's going to keep His promise. Why should God keep His promise? Now let's talk about that a little bit this morning. We continue with our epic journey as we're going through the Bible, and we want to welcome the live stream people with us too. And so we're in the second of this mini-series in the epic journey as we go from Genesis to Revelation. We're in Abraham's journey of faith. And let me just give you a preview of what's coming. 2 more messages left in the Abraham's Journey of Faith series. And then we're going to do a couple of messages on evangelism. Now, if there's an area that I believe that most every preacher in the pulpit has failed on, it's the area of evangelism. We've not taught it. We've not emphasized on it. As a matter of fact, many of us don't know a whole lot about it because we're all different. And so we're going to start an evangelism class this fall. So this will just be a little bit of a preview going into it. It'll be more generic in the messages. But then this fall it's going to be a participation class. Because you know what? How I tell people about Jesus may not be how you can tell people about Jesus. We're all a little bit different. God made us different. So maybe I don't relate to somebody, but you relate to somebody. So this is why it's going to be important to be a participant of the class. And then coming up on September the 11th, we're going to kick off our fall series with Pray Like the King. Now, many of you have ordered the book. I've got them in the office. This is one of them. They're going to be $10.25 a piece. Now, here's what we're asking, though. When you start paying for them on August 21st, if you're going to pay us $10.25, either make the check out for that amount or bring $10.25 so that we don't have to have a gazillion quarters to give you back. So try to keep that in mind as we get close to that time period of the books. And then Marty's kicking off his fall youth group that same day then. So a lot of things coming up. Fall's coming. Football's on the way, folks. And so that, to me, is one of the best things about fall. So anyway, this morning we're talking about something exciting. That is exciting if you're familiar with what Abraham and Sarah have been going through. And so our title is Rejoicing Comes in the Morning. Comes from Psalm chapter 30, a Psalm of David. The last part of verse 5, it says, weeping may stay for the night, which Abraham and Sarah must have done a lot of this, but rejoicing comes in the morning. Life can be rough at times, and every one of us has gone through rough times in our life. A few weeks ago, we talked about that the devil roams around like a lion seeking who he can devour. And that's been him trying to get us to sin, or maybe he's causing other people to do things to us that will get us to say something or do something wrong. We're often tempted, tested, whatever, from Satan. I should say tempted. I'll get it right. Tempted from Satan, tested from God. Satan wants to get us to sin, and he's going to do everything in his power to get us to sin. We saw Abraham and Sarah and Lot, the mistakes that they have made because God was trying to teach them faith, and Satan was tempting them with trying to hurry things along and do things their way instead of God's way. You and I have suffered different things as we've been tempted by Satan. We've lacked faith. We've not stayed faithful to God. We just downright decided we were going to do this anyway besides what God said. There's been times that we've actually forgotten about God. You know, it's one of those times that you said something or did something, and the next day or sometime later, you realized, that was stupid. Why did I do it? Just the brain wasn't thinking about right and wrong, about God and so forth. And then there's other times that we've caused anger to people, and we've had to apologize. We've had to humble ourselves, or they've done things to us that ticked us off, and we made mistakes. These are outside things from Satan to get us to sin. But what we're talking about today is something a little bit different. The testing of God on Abraham and Sarah, and God tests us also. God called on Abraham to leave his country. Now this was over by the land of, by Ur, which is over by the Persian Gulf. They traveled to the area of Haran, which is north of the land of Canaan, or the future day Israel. And then God called them down into this land of Canaan, the land that God promised to Abraham and Sarah, and that they would become a great nation. Now, we hear the great nation. Abraham and Sarah heard something different. They heard, we're going to have a child. Now, a whole different ballgame. Ladies, it's not that we don't cherish you. We cherish you very much today as much as we do the guys. But back then, it was all about the guys. It was all about a boy baby. They needed a son to pass the generation on to the next. And that's what the whole issue was. And so, to them, they needed this son. They were going to do anything possible to get it. Now, something that some of us can't understand. When Martha and I married, the babies just seemed to come. Didn't plan any of them. Matter of fact, we had a plan how to stop the babies. They were just coming. And that's the way with many of us. The children just come. But there are some people that have a hard time having babies. And this is of great difficulty. This is doctor visits. This is temperature taking. This is timing. This is praying to God. This is weeping. This is a hard time. If that's you, then you understand Abraham and Sarah. The most cherished, prized thing in their life was a son. And Abraham was 75 years old when he went into Canaan. Sarah would have been 65. And they had been waiting decades. My wife's been gone now for 20 years. I can't fathom to think this would be 5 years more than that, 20 years. 20 years seems like a long time, but then you've got 5 more years on top of that, still waiting for that son to come. Whatever is your most prized thing that you're waiting on, think about waiting 25 years for it. And this is what God was doing to Abraham and Sarah, to develop faith in Abraham. So let's go to Genesis chapter 21. Start with verse 1. Now the Lord was gracious to Sarah, as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the very time God had promised him. Abraham gave the name Isaac to his son Sarah bore him. When his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him as God commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Sarah said, God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. And she added, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. If you remember a few weeks ago, on July the 3rd, 4th of July weekend, Abraham and Sarah had 3 visitors. One of those visitors was the Lord. Now, we don't know if this might have been Jesus at that time or whether this was a theophany. In other words, God taking on the form of a man. So one of them was the Lord, and the other 2 were angels. But the Lord had told Abraham and Sarah, this time next year, you're going to have a child. And so this had finally come about. Abraham is 100. Sarah is now 90, beyond childbearing age. This was a miracle. Her womb was what we would call dead, unable to have children, but yet God gave them this child in their old age. And God made this promise to them. And then Sarah was thrilled, as she said here, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. So let's remember what Abraham and Sarah both learned in this. That is that God always keeps his promises. God always keeps his promises. Matt Mooring was tucking his little boy in bed one night. And his little boy said, Daddy, can I have some ice cream? Oh, of course not. It's time for bed. And then Matt remembered. Earlier in the day, his son had asked for ice cream. And Matt said, well, let me just quote what Matt said. And I quote, I'll get some for you later, I promise. End quote. Now, you've been there. You've done that. I've done that. We make a promise to our kids, and then we forget about it. He had gotten the ice cream. It was in the house now, but they'd gotten busy. Dinner, had to prepare dinner. Then they had to clean up after dinner. Then they had to clean up the house because the babysitter was coming. The babysitter came. They got everything ready to go. And then they went off to Bible study. Him and his wife. They came home that night. Get the babysitter out of there. Get the kids in bed. Now it's 10 o'clock at night. Daddy, can I have some ice cream? Guess what father and son did around 10:15 that night? They had chocolate swirl ice cream. See, we often forget about the promises that we make because we're weak at this. God doesn't forget a promise. We make promises. Sometimes they're idle. Sometimes we really don't even intend to keep them. Sometimes we do intend to keep them and forget about them. Now, I've got to fess up. Last Sunday, I was talking to someone, and I've got no clue who it was. I don't remember. And I think I told them I'd pray for them. You know where this is going? I have no clue who I talked to. And I have no clue what they told me. That's my problem on Sunday mornings. I get thinking about other things, and if you tell me something on Sunday morning you want me to remember it, you've either got to write it down or make sure I write it down, or better yet, get a hold of me on Monday or Tuesday. Text, call, email to remind me, because I've forgotten this. So if you're that person, or if you know who that person was, please let me know after service. Nobody after first service told me, so please let me know. I am a guilty participant in this. I said I would pray, or whatever it was I said, and I haven't got a clue who it was now. So, don't we do this though? Somebody tells us something, and I'll pray for you. And then a few weeks later, when everything is resolved, and you think, oh, I forgot. And that's why it's best if we write it down. So if you're that person, I apologize. But remember, God always keeps His promises. Well, now we're not finished yet, because there's some bad news and there's some good news yet. Let's go to verse 8. The child, that would be Isaac, grew and was weaned. And on the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great feast. But Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham was mocking. And she said to Abraham, "Get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son, Isaac." Now just imagine Abraham. He's got 2 sons. One is 8 days old. They're circumcising him. He's thrown a great feast. His other son is maybe a young teenager, maybe not quite there yet. And he's doing what kids do. Mocking in some way, making fun. Kids do that. But Sarah doesn't like Ishmael. Sarah doesn't want Hagar around. And so she tells Abraham, get rid of him. Can you imagine what that's doing to Abraham? Verse 11. The matter distressed Abraham greatly because it concerned his son. But God said to him, do not be so distressed about the boy and your slave woman. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. I will make the son of the slave into a nation also, because he is your offspring. Now look at verse 13 again. I will make the son of the slave into a nation also, because he is your offspring. Even though Abraham and Sarah blew it, they messed up God's plan, God was still faithful to His original promise. Yes, the promise was to go through Isaac, the son of he and Sarah, but God said, I will make your other son, without saying that you and Sarah messed up on, and Hagar, and I'll make him into a nation also. Isn't that God? Didn't forget His promise, like you and I forget our promises. And so, God always keeps His promises. God always keeps His promises. And it's our job to remember God's promises. Why come to church? So that we can be reminded of God's promises. Why go to Sunday school, Bible study? Why get around other Christians? So that when we forget God's promises, that somebody else can remember and help us to remind us of those promises, because you and I often forget. And there are many times when you and I forget God's promises, especially when things don't go right. Think about Jesus' disciples. Some of them have been with Him the whole 3 years of His ministry. Others of them not quite that long, but most of them have been there a long time. And as Jesus got closer to the end of His life, as He was getting closer to the time He would go to Jerusalem and get crucified, He was telling His disciples, destroy this temple, in 3 days I'll rebuild it. He specifically told them, I'm going to die. I'll come back to life. They didn't hear it. Went right over their heads. And you know why? Because they had a concept. Yes, they were right. Jesus is the Messiah. But their concept was that He is going to be the King of Israel, physical realm. He is going to destroy Rome. They're going to have a kingdom like David or greater than King David. It's going to be vast. They're going to rule the world. And so everything Jesus was telling them about dying and coming back to life was just over their head, in one ear and out the other, because their minds were on something different. And so imagine then, when Jesus is arrested, scared, but maybe not too worried yet, goes through his trial. He's beaten. And they're waiting for Jesus to raise up in power. He's nailed to the cross. They know he can come down, but he's not. He's dead. He's buried. Now, can you imagine the disciples? We've all lost loved ones and the hole that's left in our lives. But in Jesus' case, the disciples, he was the king. He is the Messiah, so they thought. And then Sunday, and he's alive. Jesus kept his promise. Just the same way that he keeps his promise, he's coming back again. In the same way that God makes promises to us, and God will not forget to keep those promises. And these are the promises you and I need to remember, because we all go through dark nights. We all go through times of distress and of being afraid or worried. We need to remember God's promises when we're without hope, when everything seems lost. Remember his promises when we're worried about our son or daughter, that they're sick. Remember promises when someone's in the hospital and we don't know if they're going to make it through the night, or they don't make it through the night. Remember those promises that's there. We're worried about, we don't know how to pay the bills. Maybe we've missed some food, we've missed some meals and we're hungry. Maybe we've given up food so our kids can have the food. Maybe it's us that's sick. We don't know what the outcome is. Maybe we're suffering. Maybe you're out of work. Maybe you've tossed and turned because you said something bad to somebody else, or they did it to you, and you're all concerned. Things are just going downward. God is with us, and God has made promises that he will see us through. Now, that may not always be the way that we want, but God has promised that he will be there, and we can turn to God and trust him. And this is what Abraham and Sarah had to do. 25 years of waiting, and all the mistakes they had made. But God kept his promise. And they rejoiced at the birth of that son. So waiting, it's difficult. But here's a question for us. What is God teaching me? The question that all of us need to ask when we're going through these dark valleys, or even on bright and sunny days, what is God teaching me? There's always a lesson. And this is the question that you and I need to continually ask ourselves. Maybe God's teaching you patience, teaching us to trust him, to have faith in him. Maybe he's teaching us to be kind to someone, or to help somebody that's in need. Maybe he's teaching us to keep our promises. Can he? If you're going to say that you're going to pray for someone, write it down. Maybe he's teaching us to help others keep their promises. Maybe he's teaching us the true meaning of love, that we don't understand it. Maybe he's teaching us that joy is not about things, but it's about outcomes and attitudes, and to keep focus on things. Maybe he's teaching us peace through God. Not our peace, but God's peace. Forgiving others. Maybe he's teaching us the daily faithfulness to God, that daily walk, or the value of work. Or as we said, do we wait on God? I think I maybe skipped that. Do we wait on God, or do we take action? Let's talk about that a little bit. That's a difficulty that we face. Sometimes when we're we know God's going to give us something, or there's going to be action that's going to be good with God? Are we to wait on God, or are we to take action? These are tough decisions that we need to take care of sometimes. Maybe He's teaching us anger control. Maybe He's teaching us perseverance. There's a whole variety of things He might be teaching us, but I guarantee you there's one thing He is trying to teach us, and that is, how can we become more like Jesus? Whatever we're going through, whatever the trial, whatever the dark valley, whatever the good day is, how can we become more like Jesus? And then ask yourself this next question. What am I going to do about it? You know, so many times we might learn something, but then we forget about the application. What are we going to do about it? Are we just going to keep on doing what we were doing, or are we going to actually do something to remedy or to prove that we did learn what God wanted us to learn? As we go through our tough times, and maybe those tough times are from Satan, where he's tempting us. Maybe those tough times are from God, where He's testing us. What do we learn, and what are we going to do about it? Let's go to God in prayer. Father, this is difficult. It's easy to talk about this morning, but when we're the ones that are going through this trial, what are you trying to teach us? And then once we maybe figured that out, what are we going to do about it? Action. And this isn't just something that we ask ourselves this morning, it's something that we ask ourselves every day. I just hope and pray that everyone will take a bulletin and will put it someplace where they can see it, so they can realize that God, you're expecting something of them, expecting something of me, so that we will become more like Jesus in our actions and deeds and attitude. So, Father, go with us and lead us. Draw us closer to you and help us to respond in the right way. For it's in Jesus Christ, your Son's name, we pray. Amen.
Thank you for watching the message. If we can help you in any way, we ask that you please contact us. Check us out on our website at roscopchurch.org. You can find the information there, how to contact us. We'd love to hear from you, talk with you, and help you in your walk with Jesus. Thank you once again for joining with us.